Let's start off with religion and postmodernity today. And while discussing religion and postmodernity under this entire section, we would be discussing three main things, three main points. Number one, we'd speak about an increasing flow of ideas and beliefs that are possible through greater interconnectedness globally. In other words, we're talking about how globalization, how technological advancement has brought in a change in terms of how people see things, what people believe in, how they want to practice religion if they want to. Number two, we talk about the growth of NRMs, also known as new religious movements, and NAMs, that is new age movements. And we'd speak about the role religion in people's life around the globe has today. Number three, we'd speak about the rise of fundamentalism. So there are three different sections that we divide this entire uh, topic into. Taking a start over here with the new forms of religion, that is new religious movements and new age movements. When we speak about new religious movements and new age movements, we have spoken about NRMs and NAMs earlier. I have shared a couple of documents on this as well. And taking a start, if we speak about the reasons for the growth of sects and cults. Now, NRM की जब हम बात करते हैं तो new religious movements या NRMs, we use the term new religious movement, or this term was introduced to avoid a negative connotation that is usually linked with the term sects and cults. So there has been, we have considerable evidence that shows us that there has been an increase in the reasons for the growth. There's been an increase in NRMs, and over here we speak about the reasons for the growth of sects and cults specifically. To take a start here, religious sects and cults are not a new phenomenon. They've existed for centuries. According to Steve Bruce in 1995, he traced the emergence of the first sects to the reformation of the Christian church. We're speaking about the origins of NRMs. And according to Steve Bruce in 1995, जब आप बात करते हो about the emergence of first sects, this could be linked to back the 16th century in Europe, where we'd link it to the reformation of Christian church. Despite this, most existing sects and cults originated in the 20th century. So this originated here, but then majority of them, they developed in the 20th century, particularly in the 1960s and 1970s. So the growth of sects and cults can be explained either in terms of, number one, why people choose to join NRMs. Number two, looking at changes in wider society. Ab aapke paas, if we say, like I had said a couple of minutes earlier, that there's been a rise in NRMs, there's been a growth of NRMs, and this is statistically very evident. अब सवाल ये पैदा होता है, why is it that people are choosing to join NRMs? One. Number two, we speak about the changes society has experienced, changes wider society has experienced, to see how they're both linked together. So when we speak about the reasons for the growth of sects and cults, let's talk about this first factor, that is marginality. Marginality or marginal groups of a particular society. Number one, what does the term marginal mean? Or what does marginalization mean? When we use the term marginalization, we're typically referring to a particular social group that has been pushed towards a corner. Like I keep on saying, if you are to draw a margin, if you are to draw a margin somewhere in your notebook maybe, तो आप जब margin draw कर रहे होते हो तो margin को आप हमेशा किसी एक corner में draw करते हो, right? जब आप margin को किसी एक corner में draw करते हो तो we're talking about, when we use the term marginal or when we use the term marginalization, we're referring to groups that are being pushed towards the corner of a society, groups that have been pushed towards a corner in society. Now, the first factor that has to be dealt with or to be taken into consideration over here is marginalization. Marginalization ki kya involvement hai, or what sort of role does marginalization play when it comes to the growth of sects and cults? Taking a start here, Weber in 1963. His book was first published in 1922, provided one of the earliest explanations for the growth of sects. He argued that they were likely to arise within marginal groups. Now, the question that arises here is, why is it that marginal groups would want to join NRMs? Now, there are several reasons behind this. Amongst those reasons, the first one, these marginal groups, they typically do not receive the prestige, the power, the status, the economic rewards they think they deserve in a society. वो ग्रुप्स जो पावरलेस होते हैं, हम उनको मार्जिनल ग्रुप्स कहते हैं. Powerless groups, the prestige, the status, the economic rewards that they think they deserve, but the society does not offer them. There's a likelihood, according to Weber, that they might end up joining NRMs. Now, why join NRMs? Because them lacking power and control over their lives, or the position that they hold in a particular society, they'd want some or the other sort of recognition. अगर आपको typical conventional religions से वो recognition नहीं मिल रही, तो आपको probably NRM से आप ये look forward कर रहे होते हैं, पर NRM से आप ये expect कर रहे होते हैं कि NRMs आपको वो power, prestige, control, economic rewards offer करेंगे जो कि society आपको नहीं दे रही, even when you deserve them. Moving on, one solution to this problem is to join a sect based on what Weber calls a theodicy of disprivilege. Now, this theodicy of disprivilege, or in other words, it's a justification. Now, these individuals from marginal groups, they justify their act of joining an NRM because they lack the material success, the social status, like I've been saying since the last 5 minutes, that they think they deserve in a society. I'm assuming everyone understands this idea of theodicy of disprivilege. Moving on, the second explanation that we have was put forward by this British sociologist, Brian Wilson. We've spoken about Brian Wilson earlier when we were discussing secularization. Now, according to Brian Wilson, remember we're discussing all of this under the heading of the reasons behind the growth of sects and cults. Number two, like I said, we'd speak about Wilson over here. According to Brian Wilson, he pointed out that a variety of situations could lead to the marginalization of groups in society. What are the factors that are leading to this marginalization? And when a particular group feels like they have been cornered down, when a particular group feels like they've been pushed towards a corner, this, according to Brian Wilson, provides a fertile ground for the development of sects. Fertile ground, जिस तरीके से आपके पास कोई भी land होती है, fertile land हो, बीज फेंकते हैं आप, तो ऑटोमेटिकली आपका क्रॉप ग्रो होना शुरू हो जाता है. तो इसी तरीके से अकॉर्डिंग टू ब्रायन विल्सन, जब हम बात करते हैं about these marginalized groups, these marginalized groups, they act like a fertile ground, and this helps in the development of different sects. Taking this ahead, these situations include defeat in war, natural disasters, or an economic collapse. In part, the growth of sects in the USA in the 1960s was accomplished through the recruitment of marginal and disadvantaged group. You know what? It's very simple. Even if you question yourself, if you ask yourself, you know, these marginal groups or individuals or members from these marginal groups, they're more vulnerable, or it's easy to manipulate them. The society isn't offering them much. They don't have enough of, they don't have economic stability. They don't have enough of power, prestige, or their social standing, or the position that they hold in the society. They aren't really happy with it. So these individuals from vulnerable groups, these individuals are more vulnerable rather. An example of this from the US is the Nation of Islam. For example, they aimed to recruit poor and marginalized African Americans, such as those serving a prison sentence. If you want to read more about about the Nation of Islam NRM, this is from Wikipedia. You might as well give this a read. Now, moving on. The Nation of Islam, for example, aimed to recruit poor and marginalized African Americans, such as those serving a prison sentence. For someone serving a prison sentence, they don't have much. The society isn't really offering them much. The only thing in that case, if there's any particular social group where they think they'd have some standing, if there's a particular group where they think they'd be looked after, if there's a particular group where they think they would be taken care of or get any sort of recognition, or that might end up improving their social standing or social position in a society, gives them all the reasons to be a part of it. Now, moving on. However, for the most part in the 1960s and 1970s, the membership of the world rejecting new religious movements was drawn among the ranks of young white middle class Americans and Europeans. Let me remind you this term, world rejecting NRMs. Roy Wallace in 1984, he had come up with three distinctively different categories, tried to dividing uh, different NRMs, and they namely were world rejecting NRMs, world accommodating NRMs, and world affirming NRMs. तो ये world rejecting NRMs क्या थे? World rejecting NRMs वो NRMs, वो new religious movements जो बहुत ज्यादा, I mean, they aren't really happy with worldly affairs, and they sort of reject worldly affairs. So in other words, they would expect their members to put worldly their current life aside, and they're of course in that case very demanding as well. So the membership of the world rejecting NRMs was drawn from among the ranks of young, white, middle-class Americans and Europeans. According to Roy Wallace, this is the gentleman I was referring to. According to Roy Wallace, despite this background, despite what background? Despite this background, most were marginal because they were likely to be involved in alternative lifestyles, such as those related to hippie subcultures, drug use, or surfing. So, up being marginal doesn't at all mean it would always be economically in a what do you call it, bad position. मार्जिनल ग्रुप कोई भी ऐसा ग्रुप जिसको सोसाइटी ज्यादा रिकॉग्नाइज नहीं कर रही होती, कोई भी ऐसा ग्रुप जिसे सोसाइटी एक्सेप्ट नहीं कर रही होती, and one reason behind that could be adopting an alternative lifestyle. The hippie culture that was very popular in the 1960s and 1970s in the Western world, drug addicts, surfers, marijuana users, so on and so forth. So there were three different references that we have spoken about so far. Number one, my dear, we spoke about Max Weber. Number two, we spoke about Brian Wilson, and number three, we spoke about where is it? Number three, we spoke about Roy Wallace. Now, taking it ahead, another factor, another reason that could be linked to the growth of sects and cults. And over here, let's talk about relative deprivation. I'm assuming everyone sitting over here does know what the word deprivation mean. What does the word deprivation mean? Being deprived, right? Now, this deprivation doesn't at all mean this deprivation. This deprivation doesn't at all mean it has to do with economic deprivation. It could be spiritual deprivation as well. And since there's this term relative being used over here, it's subjective. Relative ka matlab kya hota hai? When you're comparing yourself with someone, right? When someone feels that they are relatively deprived, when someone feels like, I mean, being relatively deprived again has a lot to do with subjectivity. It's a subjectively perceived deprivation. It's a subjective notion. So relative deprivation, like I said, has to do with spiritual deprivation as well. The concept of relative deprivation refers to subjective perceived deprivation, the feeling of having less than others. Certain members of the middle class, for example, may feel spiritually deprived rather than materially deprived in a world they see as too materialistic. Now, there are so many people who might have a lot, as typically the world sees us, as typically this materialistic world sees us. So, but then again, despite of them being successful otherwise, as the world sees you, there's a possibility that deep down inside you might be feeling lonely. You might feel that lack of you being a part of a community. You might be wanting togetherness. You might be wanting people around you. You might be wanting people who are loyal to you. In that case, this again, according to Roy Wallace, could be one reason that leads to many individuals wanting to join NRMs. Lack of spirituality, or in other words, spiritual deprivation, because NRMs typically offer you a community. अगर आप किसी NRM को compare करते हैं with a traditional, typical, conventional religions, the big ones such as Islam and Christianity, आपका religion के अंदर आपकी कोई खास standing नहीं होती. There won't be many people who know you. I'm sure you'd all agree, जितना छोटा ग्रुप होता है उतनी ज्यादा आपको आइडेंटिफिकेशन आपकी आसान होती है, उतने ज्यादा आपको recognition मिलना आसान होती है. So according to Roy Wallace, this means that they therefore seek salvation in the sense of community offered by the sect. It becomes an opportunity for them. Number two, moving on, if we speak about Stark and Bainbridge. According to Stark and Bainbridge, they also employed the concept of relative deprivation in explaining the origins of sect. They define sects as an organization that breaks away from an established church. Now, an organization that is broken away from an established church. Now, why is it that an organization would break away from established church? Probably because they think that the church isn't doing justice, or the church isn't really playing its religious role the way it should be. Or maybe they think that people who are working in the church, people who are part of the church, who are supposed to look after the church, they're corrupt. If your belief, if you feel like that church as an organization is some way or the other compromising, there's a possibility that individuals, like-minded individuals rather, from that particular church might want to break away or separate themselves from that church. So moving on, they define sects as organizations that break away from an established church, and they believe it is the relatively deprived who are likely to break away. I'm assuming Roy Wallace made sense over here. We're discussing all of this under the heading of relative deprivation. Relative deprivation का point हम लोग discuss कर रहे हैं under the heading of the reasons behind the growth of sects and cults. Relative deprivation to discuss करते हुए, number one, my dear, we spoke about Roy Wallace. Number two, we spoke about Stark and Bainbridge. And number three, we'd speak about Meredith Maguire. Now, this lady, Maguire, moving on. Now, Maguire argues that relative deprivation does not directly cause the growth of sex, but it can produce conditions which make growth more likely. So I hope all of this, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. According to Meredith Maguire, according to Dr. Maguire, she believes that relative deprivation को आप directly associate नहीं कर सकते, but it sure does produce certain conditions which makes the growth of sects and cults develop easy. Now, we've spoken about two factors so far. Number one, we spoke about marginalization or marginal groups. Number two, we spoke about relative deprivation. We move on and we discuss this third factor over here, that is social change. Now, social change को discuss करते हुए, again, we referring to Brian Wilson over here. Now, Brian Wilson argued that sects arise during rapid periods of social change. Rapid periods of social change. You see, जब society के अंदर change आ रही होती है, when there's a social change or change typically brings in a lot of uncertainty, which might lead to chaos and panic. Uncertainty for many individuals, many social groups might lead to chaos and panic. And in a chaotic situation, where norms are typically disrupted, social relationships lack consistency, the meaning people give to life, that starts getting shakier. In these sort of conditions, according to Brian Wilson, they again could be playing a role in terms of the growth, in terms of the development and growth of NRMs, in this case specifically sects. जब हम बात करते हैं about sects, so over here we have an example of the rise of Methodism being associated to the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution जब ब्रिटेन में आया था, of course that's a huge social change. इस Industrial Revolution की वजह से कई लोग mobilize हुए थे. There was a lot of geographical mobility that was experienced. Many people lost their, whatever the work they used to do. Of course, जब आपके पास Industrial Revolution आया था, like I keep on giving you all examples, आपके पास what do you call it, cottage industry आपकी बहुत बुरी तरह affect हुई थी. And these people in a chaotic, in a difficult situation, religious organization, and in this case, a smaller, newer religious organization. In this case, specifically, we're referring to sects over here. This could be an amazing platform for these people to feel less chaotic, for them to panic less, because these sects might be giving answers to many questions that remained unanswered for them through a typical conventional church. Moving on. Wilson gave the example of the rise of Methodism in the working class communities during the early years of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Methodism provided the support of a close-knit community organization, well-defined and strongly sanctioned norms and values. A close-knit community, well-defined and strongly sanctioned norms and values, and a promise of salvation. अब एक अनसर्टन सिचुएशन के अंदर अगर आपको कोई ऑर्गेनाइजेशन या कोई कम्युनिटी ये सब कुछ ऑफर कर रही हो, तो देयर इज अ पॉसिबिलिटी दैट many people, especially we're talking about working class communities over here, people from economically poorer backgrounds, they might want to take this opportunity and be a part of this community. It is promising them salvation as well. It's a close-knit community. If it's a close-knit community, the likelihood of you getting help and assistance whenever in need, whenever required, would be higher. This is defining norms for you. क्योंकि जो हमने ऊपर पढ़ा, आपके पास in rapid periods of social change, आपके typically norms disrupt हो जाते हैं. Norms disrupt होंगे, society में confusion आएगी. Moving on. Similarly, Steve Bruce attributes the development of a range of religious institutions, including cults and sects, to a general process of modernization and secularization. If you allow this point, we have spoken about this earlier as well when we were discussing secularization and modernization. According to Steve Bruce, he links modernization and secularization to the development of cults and sects. I hope all of this has made sense so far. We're discussing reasons for the growth of sects and cults. Number one, we spoke about marginality. Number two, relative deprivation. Number three, we spoke about social change. Now, the next topic that we have over here is the reasons for the growth of new religious movements. So the reasons for the growth of NRMs now. The growth of new religious movements is a global phenomenon, that it is. Evidence through membership and affiliation. Although patterns are variable, there are different patterns. Global phenomenon है, NRMs आपके पास बढ़ते जा रहे हैं, लेकिन आपका पैटर्न वेरी करता है. जरूरी नहीं है कि पूरी दुनिया के अंदर एक ही तरीके से, एक ही पैटर्न से NRMs की ग्रोथ हो रही हो. Again, Roy Wallace pointed to a number of social changes that he believed accounted for the growth of new religious movements. Now we're talking about a couple of social changes, a number of social changes, how these social changes have been attributed to the growth of new religious movements in the 1960s, some of which particularly relate to young people here. Number one, when we speak about the first factor, according to Wallace, Roy Wallace stated that the growth of higher education. Now see, the more educated you are, the more exposure you have, the more chances there are that you'd be exposed to different ideas, different lifestyles, which again can lead to you wanting to try something new. Like this book says, Wallace stated that the growth of higher education extended the transition between childhood and adulthood. People today are dependent on the parents for longer. People get educated, or they're a part of this gaining education process for a longer period of time, relatively, as compared to the past. Giving young people the time to explore different ideas, lifestyles that are free from work and family responsibilities, which again could be a reason why individuals would want to try out something new and be a part of NRM. Second, the young feel that new technology would lead to the end of economic scarcity, giving the economic freedom to try out new ways of living. Now, you've seen how individuals who are a part of the new media, like YouTubers, you've seen them. I mean, I've heard they earn in millions. Moving on, the third radical political movement in the 1960s encouraged the exploration of alternative lifestyles. These reasons coincide with the large-scale social change which led many individuals to turn to new religious movements for individual reasons. Now, these individual reasons could be number one, search for an identity, trying to get a new identity for themselves, probably not wanting to stick to the identity they were born, probably not wanting to live their life live their lives through their ascribed status or the status that they got on birth, wanting to try out new things. So the three factors over here put forward by Roy Wallace, the reasons for the growth of NRMs. The first one, the growth of higher education. Number two could be newer technology. Let me highlight this with yellow. And the third one, individuals because of radical political movements wanting to explore alternative lifestyles because of all individual reasons. And these I've highlighted over here would help you understand this better. Moving on. If we speak about, now we've spoken about, there are many students I see they end up getting confused between these. This is NRMs. We have spoken about them in detail earlier, and these are NAMs. NRMs and NAMs, they're linked, but they aren't the same. When we talk about the reasons for the growth of new age movements now, NAMs, reasons for the growth of new age movements. John Drain argues that the appeal of new age movements is connected to the failure of new religious movements to deliver personal satisfaction. Are we talking about traditional religions and then NRMs and then NAMs? Dissatisfaction from this leading to this, and then dissatisfaction from this, probably leading to this in the sequence. Now, John Drain connected the failure of new religious movements to deliver personal satisfaction. Drain, along with postmodernist sociologists, claims that Western societies are turning against modern institutions and belief systems. They claim that people have lost faith in these due to the problems experienced in the modern era. Now, people losing faith in religions, this losing faith wala part could be attributed to there being world wars. I mean, we'd speak about this in the next lesson, maybe, if not today, how people as warmly they welcomed science. Because remember, अगर आप थोड़ा हिस्ट्री की तरफ जाएं तो पहले आपके पास थियोलॉजिकल एरा था अकॉर्डिंग टू ऑगस्ट कॉम्प, इसके बाद आपके पास थियोलॉजिकल एरा व्हेन पीपल wholly solely relied on religion. They relied on religion to provide them with answers to questions about their existence, about their identity. Religion से लोग religion पहले लोग सिर्फ और सिर्फ religion से answers demand करते थे, expect करते थे. उसके बाद आपके पास religion के बाद आ गई what do you call it, rationalization. The idea that was put forward by Weber. लोग rationally believe करना, लोग rational answers को seek करना शुरू कर दिया लोगों ने. Because remember, my dear, religion is an article of faith. Rationality की तरफ जब लोग गए तो लोगों की expectations बढ़ गई society से. Expectations towards science working or the society working towards making an individual's life better. आप expect कर रहे हो कि science improvement in technology would lead to better living conditions for individuals, would work towards making this world a better place. And instead, if you have to experience world wars, not to forget environmental destruction, the depletion of the ozone layer, there are also considerable skepticism about science, such as the way that some drug companies have placed pursuit of profit over a desire to improve and cure illnesses. I'm sure you've all heard this. Medicine companies, pharmaceutical companies, अगर आपके पास सारी बीमारियां सही हो गई तो how do you think they'd make money? Again, moving on. Similarly, the church is treated with distrust today due to the failure to keep in touch with the people's need for spirituality. I mentioned this 10 minutes earlier as well. You expect from a church to be able to keep up with the needs of individuals who seek spirituality. What is the church doing then? And because it has been associated with corruption and abuse cases, this has led to people turning to New Age movements as an alternative postmodern form of spirituality. New Age movements is seen by many as an alternative postmodern form of spirituality. However, many New Age movements are based on adapted versions of existing religions. For example, yoga is connected to Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, but can be practiced today in a secular or spiritual way. See, these traditional typical religions, they are more demanding. However, when you're being a part of NAMs, these NAMs, you could customize them. You could customize your experiences. If you remember, we've spoken about Paul Heelis. यहाँ पे भी नाम लिखा हुआ है. Paul Heelis. How he claimed individuals should be working towards seeking spirituality their own way. And when I say their own way, according to Paul Heelis, everyone would have their own way, would have their own, what's the word, way again, to be able to get to their spirituality, to be able to live, to be able to experience spirituality. Now, on the surface, New Age movements appear to contradict the views of sociologists such as Weber that the modern world is becoming increasingly rational. However, if Heelis and Bruce are both correct, then the rationality of modernity also brought with it individualization. अब आप कहते हो rationality आई है तो rationality की वजह से individualism आया है. Individualism आया है, so this individualism has today led to the growth of non-rational beliefs again. These NAMs could be non-rational as well. Non-rational, irrational, call it whatever you guys want to. Now, I hope all of this has made sense. We had spoken about new forms of religion, new religious movements, and new age movements. We started off with the reasons for the growth of sects and cults. We spoke about marginality. We spoke about relative deprivation. We spoke about social change being factors. We moved on. We spoke about the reasons for the growth of new religious movements. Then we moved on and spoke about the reasons for the growth of new age movements. Now, these are a couple of key terms that everyone should be reading through thoroughly. And this brings this tiny topic to an end. And the next topic that we have in line is religion in postmodern global society, privatized beliefs, and fundamentalism.